the earlier class we have discussed the philosophy of Indian Constitution or the preamble of the Indian Constitution, the term which is used in the preamble. In this class we will discuss the nature and significance of fundamental rights, and also we can analyze the characteristics, features of individual fundamental rights. Fundamental rights are distinct from other rights. Other rights are given to the citizens, are granted at the will of the state. But whereas the fundamental rights are considered to be inherent in the individual and granted to them by virtue of doctrine of natural law. In the current scenario, it is very difficult to achieve liberty and equality in absolute sense. Hence, the fundamental rights are granted subject to certain reasonable restrictions. The state has power to encroach upon the fundamental rights for the common good and welfare of the state. But at the same time, fundamental rights prohibits unreasonable interference of the state in their exercise or enjoyment. Fundamental rights are one of the important features of the Indian Constitution. They are the basis for the political democracy of our state. The Constituent Assembly appointed a special committee under the chairmanship of Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel to deal with problem of fundamental rights. This committee again appointed a subcommittee headed by J.D. Kripalani to prepare the scheme of fundamental rights and minority safeguards. On the basis of the report submitted by the committee, the drafting committee of the Constituent Assembly prepared a chapter on fundamental rights. The study of the constitutional law attains much significance because its study shows as to how the rights of the citizens are protected, governed and administered as against the state. The fundamental objective of Constitution of India is to attain liberty, equality, fraternity, dignity and justice to all its citizens. Protection from discrimination on any ground of religion, race, caste, sex or place of birth. Then freedom of speech and expression, assembly, movement, residence and freedom of profession and minorities' cultural and educational rights. On the other hand, some of the fundamental rights are available to any person living in this country, whether Indian or foreigner. For example, equality before law and equal protection of laws, no double punishment for the same offence, and self-incrimination, protection of life and personal liberty against any action without authority of any law. Fundamental rights are not absolute. That means state can place reasonable restrictions on their use and enjoyment. President has the power to suspend the fundamental right except Article 20 and 21 during national emergency. Characteristics of fundamental rights means fundamental rights are guaranteed against the state action. A right cannot be said to be a fundamental right if it is not enforceable against the state. It is to be noticed that where ordinary legal rights are available against private individual, but whereas fundamental rights are available against the state, in case violation of fundamental rights by a private individual unless such violation is supported by the state, they are enforceable against private individuals. Fundamental rights are essential for the development and growth of the personality of individual. They enable the individual to lead their life with dignity and honor. Therefore, fundamental rights make the human life prosperous. Following are some of the special characteristics of the fundamental right. First one is not absolute. Fundamental rights are not absolute in its nature. The Constitution of India imposed several restrictions on the enjoyment of the fundamental rights. It is necessary to create balance between individual freedoms and public welfare. The citizens have to enjoy these rights subject to sovereignty, integrity and security of state, international relation, decency and morality. An example, under Article 21, personal liberty of the person shall not be deprived except procedure established by law. A person imprisoned means he should be an offender, and to be imprisoned him through procedure followed under CRPC. The second characteristic feature of fundamental right is justiciable. Fundamental rights are justiciable in nature. That means, if any of these fundamental rights are violated, affected individual is entitled to move the Supreme Court and High Court for the enforcement. The Supreme Court may declare a law passed by the Parliament or state legislature or orders issued by any executive authority as null and void if these are found to be inconsistent with the fundamental rights. Next is suspension of fundamental rights. The President of India may suspend the operation of all fundamental rights except Article 20 and 21 during national emergency. Further, 6 rights guaranteed under Article 19 can be automatically suspended only when emergency is declared on the grounds of war or external aggression and not on the ground of armed rebellion. The next characteristic feature of fundamental right is supremacy of fundamental rights over ordinary laws. Fundamental rights are supreme over the ordinary laws made or enacted by the Parliament or the Executive. Article 31, Class 1 of Indian Constitution clearly stated that all laws in force in the territory of India immediately before the Constitution came into force shall be void to the extent of their inconsistency with the fundamental rights after the Constitution came into force. The laws made after the Constitution came into force, if they are inconsistent with the fundamental rights, are not valid to the extent of their inconsistency. If any part of the law is against the spirit of any of the fundamental rights, it cannot be implemented. Thus, fundamental rights made supreme over all other laws or acts in our country. The next feature is there is a provision for the enforcement of rights. Another important feature of fundamental rights in our Constitution is conferment of powers upon the Supreme Court for the enforcement of fundamental rights. In India, Supreme Court acts as a custodian of the fundamental rights. Whenever and wherever fundamental right of a person are infringed or taken away by any authority, including the governmental agencies, the Supreme Court rescues the affected persons and takes all steps for restoring the fundamental rights of the person. Next characteristic feature of fundamental rights is coercive in nature. Fundamental rights are coercive in nature. That means violation of the fundamental rights will be considered as an offence. No person, agency or department of government is allowed to encroach into the fundamental rights of any citizen. If an individual or an institution confiscates or took away or encroaches into one's right, the judicial organizations hear such petitions and provide justice and punish the offenders. This coercive nature of fundamental rights acts as a barrier against the despotic behavior of governmental departments. Next one is fundamental rights are amendable. That means fundamental rights are not sacrosanct or permanent. The Parliament can make changes to the fundamental rights through an amendment, except those fundamental rights which could be considered by the court to be a part of basic structure of constitution. Such an amendment, however, requires the majority of voting, that is 2/3 majority who are sitting and voting in the house. After discussing the special characteristic features of fundamental rights, now we will discuss the fundamental rights based on categories one by one. First category is right to equality. Right to equality is the first and foremost right. It consists of 5 articles. They are Article 14, 15, 16, Article 17 and Article 18. Here Article 14 declares that state shall not deny to any person equality before law and equal protection of law within the territory of India. Equality before law is somewhat negative concept, implying the absence of any special privilege to an individual or class of individuals. Equal protection of law is a more positive concept, implying equality of treatment in equal circumstances. Article 14 forbids class legislation. It permits reasonable classification. State is empowered to classify the persons on rational basis in the interest of public peace, order, security and stability of the country. It can grant immunities to certain persons in certain circumstances. The Constitution has allowed some of the immunities. One of the important immunity is that President of India or the Governor is not allowed to any court for the exercise and performance of their powers and duties of his office. No criminal proceeding shall be instituted or continued against the President or the Governor in any court during his term office. No process for the arrest or imprisonment of the President or the Governor in any court during his term of office. No member of the Parliament shall be liable to any proceedings in any court in respect of anything said or owed by him in Parliament or any committee thereof. Article 31C is an exception to the Article 14. Article 31C is an exception to the Article 14. We should know what Article 31C says. It says, no law that seeks to implement socialistic directive principles specified in Article 39B and C shall be declared void on the grounds of contravention of the fundamental rights conferred by Article 14 and 19. Laws made by the state for implementing the directive principles contained in Class B and C of Article 39 cannot be challenged or could not be challenged on the ground that they are violative of Article 14. Another immunity class is foreign sovereignists or ambassadors or diplomats enjoy immunity from criminal or civil proceedings. The next equality class is Article 15, Class 1. It provides that state shall not discriminate against any citizen on the grounds only of religion, race, caste, sex, place of birth or any of them. Article 15, Class 2 states that no citizen on the ground only of religion, race, caste, sex, place of birth or any of them be subject to any disability, liability, restrictions or conditions with regard access to shops, public restaurants, hotels and places of public entertainment, or if the use of wells, tanks, bathing ghats, roads, places, public resorts maintained wholly or partly out of state funds or dedicated to the use of general public. Article 15, Class 3 provides that state can make special provision for women and children to enforcing their welfare program. Similarly, Class 4 empowers the state to provide protective discrimination for the advancement of any socially and educationally backward classes of citizens. For example, women may be considered more suitable for the job of nurse, while they may not be considered eligible for employment in heavy industries. Such kind of a discrimination would be quite legal because it is based on the ground other than sex. Article 16 guarantees equality of opportunity for all citizens in the matters of public employment. That means it provides reservation in appointment as well as in promotion to those who are socially and educationally backward classes. The next equality class is Article 17. It abolished the untouchability and its practices in any forums is forbidden. The enforcement of any disability arising out of untouchability shall be an offence and punishable in accordance with the law. Article 35 Class A empowers the Parliament to prescribe punishment for those acts declared to be an offence under Part 3rd of Indian Constitution. By virtue of this power, Parliament has enacted the Untouchability Act 1955. Later, it could be renamed as Protection of Civil Rights Act 1955, and it declares certain acts as an offences when committed on the ground of untouchability and prescribe punishment for the same. The last article which ensure the equality, the Article 18 guarantees right to equality among citizens by completely forbidden from conferring any title like king, queen, etc. other than military and academic. On the other hand, it imposes a duty on the citizens not to accept any title from any foreign state without the prior consent of the President of India. In 1954, the Government of India decided to confer titles like Bharat Ratna, Padma Vibhushan, Padma Bhushan and Padma Shri to those persons who rendered meritorious social service. This practice was continued up to 1977, but the Janata government abolished it in 1977 again with the return of the Congress rule in 1980. This practice will continue. Dear student, I hope that you could understand the concept what I discussed in this class, that is special characteristic features of fundamental rights as well as equality before the law. Next class we will discuss the another kinds of fundamental rights come under part 3rd of Indian Constitution. Thank you.